I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast hosted by me, Erin Jane, where we have conversations about what it's like to perform a first responder role and the mental health challenges that can accompany it. Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I'm your host, Erin Jane. And today we are joined by James Boomhower. G'day, James. So James has been involved with EMS for over 20 years. He's currently a critical care transport specialist, being a paramedic with the Boston MedFlight. And he's also the lead peer support director there. He's the owner and creator of Stay Fit for Duty, which is an organisation dedicated to bringing mental health, wellness and awareness to the EMS community by promoting recognition, management and acceptance of acute stress in fellow EMS providers. And he's also a graduate intern in clinical psychology, where he focuses on trauma. Thanks for joining me, James.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. So like I was just saying to James, this is the first time we've had a podcast interviewee in person for a little while. So we hope all goes well. And this is also first episode back after a little break while I went home to visit Australia. So I appreciate everyone's patience and support while I got that done. And now we'll get cracking, get back into it. All right, so James, tell me what made you want to become a first responder and in particular go down the EMS route?
Sure. So I come from a family of first responders.
Really?
Not an unusual story. My father was a paramedic for quite some time, and my mother was an EMT and a dispatcher.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
That's how they met.
Yeah,
and,
so it's in your blood.
It is, yeah, totally my blood. Yeah, I really wanted to be the first person.
Okay.
I'd always been enamored with medicine. I was reading medical textbooks when I was younger. Like, really loved science, really loved medicine.
Yeah.
And really...
So you were a real cool kid at school.
Totally, yeah. I'm the coolest kid, yeah, for sure. Big glasses, the whole thing. And I just wanted to be that first person. I recognized the value of being a medical professional as early after the event as possible.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously some sense of stream to get there. It was much, much easier to become an EMT and then eventually a paramedic than it was to go down what seemed like a really daunting medical school route.
Yes.
But it was the earliest and fastest way to provide the type of instantaneous medical care that I really thought I could be helpful with.
Mm-hmm. And was that sort of all of what you just described, was that something that was sort of talked about at home given your parents' roles, or did they sort of try to keep you sort of shielded from it a little bit?
A little of both.
Mm-hmm.
My parents did not in any way, shape, or form push me into becoming a first responder.
Yeah.
My mother did it as a job. She very much liked it, but she did it, and then she got another job, and that was it.
Yeah.
My father, the same thing. Did it, very much liked it, did it in a number of different agencies, but then got another job, right, and went from there. So there was certainly no push to go into the profession. There was a ton of respect for going into the profession. Mm-hmm. But if anything, they were like, well, there's a lot of other things you can do in the world. Don't feel like you have to go down this path if you don't want to.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of, true. Like, my husband's a firefighter and I was a cop. And then you kind of, you end up having children, and then sometimes they're like, I want to be a cop, or I want to do this and I want to do that. And you're kind of like, not that you want better for your kids, but sometimes you're kind of like, there's so many other things out there that you can do. You're kind of like, I'm actually in the opposite direction to that. And so talk to me about what you were saying, sort of the idea of, going down the path of medical degree was just super sort of daunting. And, you can hear it when you talk about it, your passion in wanting to be that first person sort of on scene to provide aid to someone who really needs it. What was the process like for you?
I actually started in high school.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was almost laughably early in life. In my home state of New York, you can join the volunteer ambulance squad, volunteer fire squad, what have you, your junior year of high school. Yeah, so I was providing medical aid under very close supervision, very rudimentary medical aid at 16, 17 years old.
Wow.
And then just like straight through the pipeline, got my EMT at 18, got my paramedic at 19. So I was providing paramedic level care, giving narcotics, doing all the things a full 2 years before I could consume that.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
And was it always your intention to very much go down like that paramedic route, as opposed to just sort of not to diminish anything that like EMTs do, but as in you were just like, yeah, that's the direction I want to go in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I was an EMT for a long time, and basic life support saves way more lives than advanced life support does. But the path for me was like, I want to be the top tier of this. I want to do that. And again, like you and I talked about briefly before we hit record, with school often being easiest when you just keep going. Yeah. I certainly didn't want to stop. I knew if I stopped, then I was really going to slow down and really not necessarily get to where I wanted to go. Yeah,
and that makes sense. And so talk to me about sort of like, you said obviously you were like in New York, then how have you, over the course of your career, like ended up where you are now?
Sure. Find myself in an attic in Cambridge,
Yeah, well, that's a very different question, and probably for another podcast. But yeah, because like, you're telling me like that you've been in this field for sort of over 20 years, and now you are, from what my sort of understanding would be, you're like really at like the pinnacle of being able to provide that critical level of care as a paramedic at like Boston MedFlight. So my presumption is that you're like that bloke in a helicopter, like landing on the ground when it's like the people are really in the shit. Like that's you, I presume.
That is, critical care transport specialists do a lot of different things, but that is absolutely one of the roles. Is a 911 service or fire department will arrive to a patient, find them to be critically ill, critically injured, what have you, and either need our services, our advanced skills, and more so the advanced ability to do other modalities that certain 911 paramedics can't do or don't have the tools to do. Okay. Or there really isn't much else that we do that the 911 paramedics haven't done. Yeah. But our intervention is top, right? And we can get into Boston in a quarter of the time that they can. So recognizing the need for most critically ill patients to be at what we call definitive care as early as possible. Yeah. Looping us in on that front. We also do a tremendous amount of inter-facility work where for example, that 911 crew takes a very ill patient to the closest hospital. Yeah. And that hospital is ill-equipped to handle that patient. Yeah. So that hospital calls us. Yeah. We then assist in the resuscitation and get them to a more definitive and appropriate tertiary care center. Mm-hmm. And that is true on kind of every spectrum. It could be someone who comes in under their own power and is too sick. It could be someone in an intensive care unit that is found to exceed the capabilities of that institution. Yeah. We treat every patient from 1 minute old to 100 years old, and we're one of the only programs in the country that does really advanced medicine for every single spectrum of the lifespan. Exactly, every piece of the lifespan, without the assistance of specialty groups.
Your knowledge base is so incredibly broad, and you're talking about like having to resuscitate or work on an infant as opposed to someone in their 40s and someone like in their 80s.
Exactly. And it's a real testament to even some of our newer clinicians. Like, I had the benefit where I grew with my agency, right? When I started almost 10 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the objective. Yeah. So I had the benefit of kind of growing as our scope grew. Okay. Some of our newest clinicians, you come in the door, and in less than 4 months, we expect you to know a really good chunk of all of this stuff. Yeah, it's really challenging, but it's really prideful. I mean, the profession as a whole, being critical care transport specialists, critical care transport nurse, we're a really tight-knit fraternity. And regardless of kind of where you work, what you do, how you do it, some may have a little bit more toys, some may have a bigger helicopter, right? There are little nuances that we all fight about kind of in our own, little space. Yeah. But it really is a prideful profession, and I really do take a ton of pride, and I'm really honored.
Understandably so. I may have done some internet sleuthing and stalking, and I saw on your website, which we will get to later, is it true that you said there's only 50 of you in the state?
Yes. Yep, I think when we're using that number, and that number may have changed from when I last recorded that statement, just so I don't get too much hate. in the state of Massachusetts, there are only 2 programs that house critical care transport paramedics. So there may be other individuals that have completed their testing and just aren't working in that capacity.
Yeah.
That number now is probably closer to 75, maybe 100, because I'm thinking the two primary agencies, MedFlight included, as our organizations grow, but still a very finite number of individuals that do that work.
Very unique, exactly. And is that encompassing, is that just as a paramedic, or as the critical care transport team, like you were saying, there's nurses involved and
Yep. So we'll say in New England, to keep it broad, critical care transport requires a nurse and a paramedic.
Okay.
So there has to be that team. There is a little bit of variance as to, can that paramedic be a physician? Can they be a PA? Can they be this other aspect? But you need a dual team pairing, and that almost always is a nurse paramedic. We just found it to be the most efficient model.
Yep.
So that's what we use.
That makes sense. Now, important question: had you been in a helicopter prior to this job?
No, actually, and it's funny to bring up, because when you reach out to the people and you advocate, this is the next step I'd like to take in my career, one of the first things they have you do is come for a ride along. Let's see if you enjoyed that. If you were
let's see if you spend the whole time vomiting.
Yeah, exactly right.
And obviously you found it okay.
I did, yeah. I've certainly never really been really motion averse or anything like that. So I didn't necessarily think it was going to be a problem. I think, especially early on in your career, you're so nervous and so overwhelmed with the medicine you have to know and the care you have to provide that you don't even recognize that. There's a little bit of turbulence, right?
Yeah.
You're obviously paying attention, looking out the window, making sure there's no obstructions or anything like that. But in that early time, you're just so focused on all your stuff, you wouldn't even know if it's shaky.
Whether you're in the back of an ambulance as opposed to
exactly.
Of a helicopter. Well, I take my hat off to you. I'm not motion averse, and I don't feel like I would go that well on that. And so you were saying that you've been there for about 10 years now?
Yes.
Okay. And so where did the psychology studies enter your realm? Because not that you would have been busy enough as it was.
No, that's a great question. You'd earlier asked, how do you get from New York to Cambridge, right? How do you make this? So in New York, traditionally, to get a paramedic degree, you get an associate's.
Okay.
There are still some certification programs out there, but in most platforms, you get an associate's degree. So I obtained my associate's degree, and I started to kind of work towards my bachelor's, but I was a very new paramedic and quickly realized that I couldn't do both. I either needed to really invest in my paramedic time or invest in school, and had the assumption that the academic institutions weren't really going to go anywhere. But this kind of vocational aspect and this healthcare aspect that I worked really hard on really needed to be practiced and really needed to be worked on. So it took some time off to become as good a paramedic as I could become. And I quickly, I'd say probably a year and a half, 2 years after that, went to Maine to finish my undergraduate degree, so turn my associates into a bachelor's.
So that's just an extra 2 years,
Correct, yep. And from there, that brought me into the New England space. So that going from Maine kept me close to Massachusetts, kept me close to New Hampshire, and that was really where I started to get this feel as a New Yorker, right? As somebody who was not part of New England, because I live in New York, really got me into the New England side of it, and really turned me on to all the other options that were available to me.
And so did you sort of, what was your degree? Did you go, I'm going to study psychology, or what? Yeah, for sure. So my major was in medical biology, because there was still this thought of maybe I could become an advanced practice provider, like a PA, or something along those lines. My minor was in psychology. I always really enjoyed the field of psychology and the topic of psychology. Truly not even so much on the mental health front. It's just I found it fascinating field of study. How this gray mush can make me angry, happy, sad, right? Heal itself.
Exactly, but all of that was just really fascinating to me. The dedication of the profession to not have the luxury of sight, right? I know that hurts because I can watch your finger move, or I can do this, or I can do that, right? Versus I have to do all of this inference and all this other work to really tease out what another person is saying, their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and have to decode all of that. Always found it to be fascinating. So came in with a minor in psychology, And I'd always thought that I would do more with that, just didn't really know what that was until later on in my career when it became clear that practicing in the roles I am now as a first responder and as a crisis counselor, it would be the most beneficial for me to acquire that extra knowledge. And even then, truly, I wasn't like, I'm going to start a private practice and I'm going to do all these things. But sitting with people in that therapeutic space and providing that work is too invaluable to ignore. So the idea of like just getting the degree, which is no small feat, right?
I'm in the trenches of it now.
Yeah, exactly. The idea of like just getting it and not necessarily using it quickly fell off my radar. I would like to go and I would like to not only obtain this degree, but complete my internship and actually see and work with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sort of the thing that my mind directly went to, which is random, but you were talking about how like the difference of, you know, when you see people and like they have that visible injury and how we all talk about in like, especially like the realm that we, you know, occupy in the first responder realm and how, you know, you can have such like a psychological injury that, you know, you can't speak to, but it's still there. And then even like one thing it made me think about, I remember when I was in year like 11 at school, we read this book and it was like a war journalist who ended up having like a psychosomatic injury, like a paralysis. And it was like the first time I came across that sort of thing. And I think it's even like delving into the realm of psychology and how it affects us physically too, like is so vast and so interesting, because especially like the people that we deal with on a daily basis and our colleagues and our friends who, you know, go into the first responder realm and they experience so much trauma as a result of their roles, and then how it shows up in their body and their emotions, physicality and all that kind of thing. So
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's made me think about all kinds of random things.
No, it's perfect. And I think, you know, it's one of those things that's like so clear on paper.
Yeah.
Like we have this autonomic nervous system and there's a parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division. And if we leave the parasympathetic on, we have all of these expected and natural reactions. What we didn't fully conceptualize for a while was consistently leaving it on would actually make it rigid, right? And make it inflexible. I think the math of like, what do you do if you just pump somebody full of cortisol all day? Like we know conceptually, if you hook me up to a dopamine or norepinephrine infusion, A, I'll stroke out, right? But B, like we completely understand that this would happen. I think it's fascinating the connection between, but if we tell the brain to keep making that erroneously, will we see physical side effects? And it's always been surprising to me that that's like news. And not to be unkind to anybody who's learning about it, but the idea that like the body keeps the score is such a foundational book.
Oh my God, isn't it?
Of course it does, right? Of course, if I'm chronically stressed, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, I'm going to be that thing. But it's so hard for us to put those puzzle pieces together at all sometimes, let alone when we have to do it instantly.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, harking back to the days where the stigma and the culture of, you know, not showing weakness, not asking for help, all that kind of thing. And I think like the very clearest way, you know, from my perspective, it dates back to is obviously like, you know, the significant wars that we've had and Vietnam and all that kind of thing. And you think about how many men came back clearly experiencing, you know, PTSD symptoms, and you just, no one knew about it, no one talked about it, they drank, you know, how many, like, you know, of like parents and grandparents, like generations, like, you know, they were all drunks and abusive and all that kind of thing, and kind of, and you know, even the term like shell shock, you know, we've known of it for probably like 100 years, like since, you know, most likely since World War One. So it's really interesting that then it's something that we've kind of known about, but then people join these careers and it isn't something, and I know I didn't think of it at the time when I was like, oh, I just want to be a cop and I'm excited and yay, I want to go save the world and da 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 da, and then you get in and it's just not something that you think about until for some people it's too late and they've experienced that trauma, and then it's like, fuck, what do I do?
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because we hope that now the message is someone taught me about the trauma beforehand, right? I knew about it, I understand it, it's happening, and here are the resources that I can go.
Here are the tools, yes.
Right. And it's so important to point out that we can't expect you to use the tools if we didn't tell you what was going to happen in the first place. And we're so good at making people aware of so many different things. Yeah. And the fact that MedFlight devotes anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours of psychoeducation in their orientation platform, run by either myself or another member of the peer support team. Yeah. The fact that that's groundbreaking is great, but also simultaneously a little frustrating. Yeah, that we sit in meetings and they're like, "So tell me about this academy." It's not academy; it's a 2-hour class. They're like, "Yeah, tell me everything." And we spend more time talking to people about so many different things, all valuable, all necessary. Yeah. But how do we expect people to understand what they're going to feel or what that could look like if we never have the time to actually sit down with them and incorporate it?
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And I think might have even been Travis Scribble from my arena, posted something the other day, I think, and it was about, how much time as a police officer do you spend police academy and you learn how to shoot, you learn your defensive tactics, you learn your law, and equally like as a firefighter, you learn like the combustion of fire and what feeds it and how to put it out and but that missing ingredient is the I guess the precipitation of what you're going to face. Like you're saying, we can give you the tools, but if we haven't sort of given you a heads up beforehand, it's going to come as a shock or surprise to you.
Exactly. And I think what I find most frustrating about that is we take the time to train our police officers, right? Not dead, don't quit, right? In the event that you're hurt, you have to keep fighting until you can't fight anymore. We tell our fire professionals the same thing, right? Slow your breathing down, get out of the house. We tell our paramedics the same thing. If you're injured, keep doing this, keep fighting, keep moving forward. Our helicopter EMS specialists, right? Helicopters can crash, right? You can find yourself injured and way away from wherever you need to be, what you have in the first drills you have to believe you can survive. We teach so much grit without saying, but that grit is like 1% of your career. And in order to have that grit, you actually need to be profoundly focused on yourself and work your mind, your body, your spirit, all of this together. And because every academy, regardless of what you're learning, is trying to put 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound academy, right? Like, you don't have the time you want, we need to get recruits out, we need to do this, we need to do that. Yeah. So we're always trying to figure out what we can summarize, what we can trim. And the simple fact, like, remember, not that don't quit, you don't necessarily internalize, right, when I'm shot, I have to keep fighting. You say, oh, you're right, I'm really sick, that should have worked, not that don't quit, right? And we say to each other, right, in this idea that, like, the fact that I called out a week ago because it sounded way worse than I sound right now was like, wow, like super sick. And I'm not necessarily saying this came from like leadership or anything like that, but the idea that we're ingrained to be like, is it like sleep? Because I'm actually physically ill right now, let alone mentally or emotionally ill. And if we could make one tweak when we talk about the necessary resilience we need, you have to fight, you have to care hard for your patients, you have to do these things. But in order to do that well, you have to care for yourself. And that's more than just force.
Yeah, no, and that makes so much sense. And it's just like, like even in my police force, it was unheard of to go sick on night shift. Like, it was just not the done thing. Unless you were like bleeding in hospital, like you showed up. And it's just like that, like you're saying, like that culture and that stigma of like, you don't quit, you don't quit, you don't quit. And like, you need to be resilient, but it's like they teach it in a very structured way that it doesn't also seem to encompass their mental health and the trauma that they're exposed to and helping them navigate that. It's all more about that on duty kind of resilience. Yeah. Exactly. No, that makes sense. And so we were talking about it offline just before, but so you currently practice and provide therapy?
Yes, I do. Yep. So I am a graduate clinical intern, and what that means essentially is I am a therapist that provides care under, and again, air quotes for the camera, right, supervision. Yeah. So there is a licensed mental health counselor that oversees my care. They read all of my notes. To disclose that when I meet with you, right? You're never under the illusion that I'm a full-fledged therapist. I'm certainly not a doctor yet. I'm not any of these things. But I have a caseload. I see clients. Yeah. I interact with families, talk to doctors, do every single thing a therapist does under the watchful eye of another professional.
Yeah. And so, I'm going through the process of learning about this now, which is great. But so basically it's just like you conduct your sessions, and then there's just kind of someone almost like a call if you needed them, and what you would meet with them maybe once a week or once a fortnight and have like a discussion about, if a patient or a client is like having trouble in time, you're like, this is the strategy that I'm using CBT with them, or I'm doing this, or we're focusing on this. And then they'll be like, yep, that's great. Or like, have you considered this? Like, is that sort of what the supervision entails?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very specific to the program you're in and the state that you're trying to apply for licensure in. In my program, for my state requirements, for every 6 hours of client contact, I have to have 1 hour of either virtual or in-person supervision.
Okay.
It's
very strict.
It's very strict. Like, you'd have to explain why there was like an 8-hour block. With that is very specific, again, to my program and the agency of which I'm providing care under.
Yeah.
But they do a great job. And it's exactly what you said, that individuals rarely ever in the room with me, unless myself and the client I'm with agree that that's the right thing at this time.
Yeah.
Or they want to meet them or whatever. But where the collaboration takes place is not only in reviewing the notes that I take. So here's my PCR for our fellow first responders, or here's my patient care report. And they will read it, assess it, and sometimes come back with questions of like, how do you plan on superseding this? Or what is your platform? Thankfully, with pretty continuous supervision, I have a really strong understanding of how my supervisor provides care.
Yeah.
She is gaining an insight, as am I, as to how I provide care and the tools and resources I use. I personally subscribed to a camp and was given this advice early in my academic career to find a therapeutic alliance and go with it. Doesn't mean you can't change it ever. But like Monday, your CBT, Tuesday, your ACT, Wednesday, your internal family systems. You don't necessarily give yourself enough time to learn it all.
Yeah.
So find a lane, stay in that lane, pick what you have to, right? I'm not a strict CBT therapist every single minute of every single day.
Yeah.
But I'm not going CBT on Tuesday, and then maybe Wednesday I'll try some ACT stuff in there. Maybe she'll appreciate that. A, because it can be confusing for your client.
Of course, yeah.
And B, if you don't have a really strong grasp of the therapy you provide, to kind of wax and wane between alliances can be tricky.
Yeah, yeah. And also not every therapy it doesn't work for everyone.
Absolutely.
What works for one won't work for another. EMDR might be for one person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the adage is very true, right? If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think it's easy for you to be like, we're going to CBT this way and that way and this way, instead of being like, maybe this individual doesn't need that way. And
mortality, there you go.
I got you. And then, you're in a space where you say, okay, what else can I do?
Yeah.
Now, is it time for me to talk about either transitioning that individual to another client, or doing what most modern therapists do and say, yes, this is my alliance, but I view it from this lens, or I use a lot of self-compassion, or I think that DBT is really helpful at times in these different interventions. Yeah. But the understanding from my mentorship is just don't try to be everything, because you won't actually ever get good at anything. Yeah. Right. So stick with an alliance that you believe is helpful and continue on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we will sort of get back to that, because I think obviously that ties into the inception of Stay Fit for Duty. But you did sort of mention about the fact that where you work for now, they have a 2-hour sort of class about the mental health aspects before you kind of come on the job. And so I guess sort of what I wanted to ask was, take you back sort of 20 years, and what was addressed in regards to mental health at the inception of your don't laugh at me. Sure. It is a real question, James. When you started EMS school and all that kind of thing, was it addressed, and how did you find the process?
So I did laugh. Yeah, if anybody isn't watching everything. I think in the spirit of full disclosure, it was a little while ago, but there was absolutely a talk of this stuff can get to you. I guess there's a therapist, maybe if you're weak and you need one. And truly, I don't think I welcome any of my classmates or fellow Academy members to chime in on that.
Yeah.
I tell this story, and I want to reframe it with the fact that this individual in question is trying to be very compassionate at this moment. Because in a 2024 lens, it sounds like this human is being awful.
Yeah.
I'm 19, and in the EMS system I worked in, it was very busy. Mm-hmm. There were a number of medical oversight directors, right, physicians in the hospital that knew the paramedics well, mm-hmm. provided a lot of their clinical oversight, and obviously had some semblance of trust.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, I know this person, I know that person. So when you would come in, say, with something like a cardiac arrest, there's a lot of care mm-hmm. that happens in the back of the ambulance that looks identical to what would happen in the emergency department. And in a busy emergency department, you can kind of keep that going, right, until the other pieces get spooled up. So we're in this space where I'm transitioning care, right? I'm no longer running this code. I am kind of transitioning the care of this code to other healthcare providers. Yeah. And as my own tasks are starting to dwindle, my brain is like, okay, cool, now we can think about how sad this is, right? This is someone's brother, it's someone's father, it's someone's son. And I can feel myself still continuing to give orders, per se, right? Still continuing to drive the code and kind of be collaborative with the APPs and physicians that are there. But I can feel it like coming up here. And a really good friend of mine who's a charge nurse at this emergency department kind of grabbed me by the shoulder and was like, if you're going to cry, you better go do it in the back. Yeah. Because if any of these people see you cry, especially at 19, they will never respect you. Yeah. And again, I can't overemphasize that that person did that with compassion. They were actually trying to protect me. 100%. And that space sounds so awful now, right? Go cry in the bathroom, but really, like, that was what you were told to do. Yeah. And I don't mean in the sense, I still don't mean in the sense of like openly weep while you're providing care. Yeah. Like, there are periods in a first responder's life where you do absolutely have to compartmentalize.
Yes. Yeah.
It's in the span of hours, not days, weeks, or months. That really stuck with me. And I was incredibly young. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, message received. Emotions equals no respect. Yeah, and whatever you do, always be kind, but never, ever show emotion. And the problem with that is you don't know what to do with the emotions because you've already been told they're not okay. And you look around you and you don't see a model of anyone expressing those emotions. So, to your point earlier, I'm not in any way, shape, or form comparing a veteran shell shock to 19-year-old paramedics that day. The idea that you're like, well, how do I get rid of these terrible emotions? Because I certainly can't do what I want to do. So what substances do I have to add? What avoidance techniques do I need to use? Mm-hmm. And then you just create this cycle of everyone knows it's not okay to be not okay. So we all just kind of support each other through this cycle of terrible habits, staying out 3 a.m, substance use, substance abuse, someone inevitably driving home, right? Like all of these terrible techniques because we don't know someone's in crisis until they're on a 6-week stress leave and in an inpatient setting somewhere because we didn't give them any of the relief valves they needed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you know, obviously both having been in those situations from very different angles and perspectives, but like I always sort of found like compartmentalization to actually be really important because you're on, like you have to be on, you're professional, and I think for me as well there was like a thing of like it's not about me, like so you can't sort of let that pop, let your emotions and everything pop out because like it's right now it's not about you, it's about this person or it's about the victim or their relatives or all that kind of thing. But like you're saying, then at like the end of your shift, you feel like someone's kind of kicked you in the gut and you've had the wind taken out of you, or I still remember like getting like called to a job and a bloke had completed suicide by like carbon monoxide in his car and the whole thing up and whatever else, and trying to get him out and whatever else, and then he locked the carport. So then we start getting overcome by like the fumes, and I'm just like trying to boot the door open and then getting shit scared out of me because then the fireys were on like the other side of it, but we didn't know. So I'm like boot the door open and they're there and I'm there. It was comical at times, but yeah, and then like after you like process the scene, all that kind of thing, and you just like, it's just that, and then what do you do with it? Go home and tell your partner they're not the job. Sometimes not. Like, and then like you're saying, you go, oh, let's go out for a drink. Let's go get smashed. Let's just drink it away, dull it away, kind of like deal with that like another day. And then saying, all of it builds up and you backpack or your cup or whatever analogy that people want to use, it gets full and then you're like,
well, that's it. And then you come, I think this further expands too. So then you come to a mental health provider with this backpack or cup that's overflowing. They don't know you. Especially 10 years ago, the idea of like a culturally informed or culturally competent healthcare provider was rare.
Yeah.
So I'll share an example that I've shared before. You sit down on somebody's couch and they're like, hi, I'm Bethany, right? What's going on? And you're like, so I had this baby, right? This baby was dead. And I drilled a hole into their leg to give them medicine. And I drilled in the wrong spot of their leg. And this woman vomits. And you're like, oh, okay. I am that broken. I am that messed up. I just made a professional counselor vomit. You run away.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in no way, shape, or form asking for our responder colleagues to show a ton of grace to their mental health professionals. I think you can see where that becomes cyclical. Where if you'd gone to that mental health professional on the first week or the first month, you wouldn't have had a cup that was bursting at the seams.
True.
And there could have been a much gentler transition.
Yeah.
Again, the onus there is on the mental health professional.
I was going to say, alternatively, if you go to the right person, they just have to, again, it's not about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is where culturally informed providers can be really helpful, right? We are in a similar circle where we have a lot of the same kind of culturally informed providers, some through clinical practice, right? Never was a paramedic, seeing them for 10 years, some through literal practice that can say, how'd that feel getting that out, right? Instead of like having some really intense emotional reaction. It's also important to remember that we created surrogacy platforms, right? We have peer support, we have critical incident stress, we have other members of the mental health care chain that can take little bits of this. But if we never informed you to use them or never made them available to you, how are you supposed to find those resources?
Yeah.
You mentioned, you're right, it's not about you in that moment. And there is a level of professional decorum you need to have, be it law enforcement, be it EMS, what have you. I, to this day, am a 72-hour processor. I was a crew chief for a period of time. I was a fly car paramedic, which meant that I essentially just like roamed a service area in almost like an SUV, and I would intercept with other ambulances that needed help. Okay. Which is a lot of provide some care, get back in the truck, drive away. Provide some care, get back in the truck, drive away. And because I was in a supervisory role, be it a shift lieutenant at the firehouse,
you're like on the whole time.
Yeah, you're on the whole time. You're worried about all these other people, and you don't come down for 3 days. Yeah. But knowing that, it's a joke. Some of my peer supporters, if I have a terrible call on Saturday, will be like, I'm checking in, but I also set my alarm for Tuesday, right? Because I know you, and this actually isn't it's going to rattle around. Yeah. And Tuesday, you're actually going to allow yourself the space to process it. So that combined with the awareness of how do I respond to trauma? What does that look like for me? And normalizing that it looks different for everyone. That can also be really dangerous when one human with very little training has a laminated piece of paper in their hand and says like, okay, these are the trauma responses. You either find yourself getting admitted to a hospital for no reason, or you find yourself with some staring at you. Oh gosh, that's serious. So come on. Yeah, right? So this just real inability to align the two pieces can be really problematic.
Yeah, no, and that makes total sense. And I guess, you're, maybe blessed and cursed in the same way because
for a million reasons, but yes, in this context, how do you mean?
Because you have that added knowledge and awareness, and even you're saying, I think that's an incredible level of self-awareness to go, you know what, I know I'm going to take 3 days to process this, and I'm tipping that probably took you a while to figure out.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you led with that, because I don't want to come off as somebody who just thought about it for 10 minutes. That took years. That took therapy. That took a lot of self-awareness, because one of the first things you have to shut off is you're pussy, you're weak, you're pathetic, right? First you have to turn that dial down a little bit. And then you have to allow these sensations to actually be within you, and then wonder why. I actually went the opposite direction. I sat in my counselor's office and said, why? Like, I'm ready. I'm here. I have till 1:15. So let's get this out and go from there. And that poor counselor was like, that's not how this is going to happen, right? And then this like reflexive frustration. Fuck, I'm doing the thing, I'm going to therapy. Now it's not even on my time. Well, no. Because like you and I talked about, right? That's not how the body processes that. We still talk about people that are recovering from COVID fatigue, not necessarily physically, but emotionally, right? Because the pandemic was so much for so long. Their brains are like, okay, this is it. We live in like a really high stress area and we have to be on all the time. And in some cases, it can take quite a while for your brain to be like, okay, is it safe?
Yeah.
Right? And then really start doing stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's really true, and especially because, I mean, I think in most countries, but in particular, seemingly America, like, people experienced it very differently and had very different responses and different beliefs. Probably is like a good term of the seriousness of it.
Sure.
At times. And so, yeah, you kind of had such like a spectrum of people's experiences during that time. And I think, especially for, say, people who sort of took it incredibly seriously and were very, on the side of, I'm going to wear my mask and maintain those levels of protection as long as I can, or that kind of thing, re-entering, quote unquote, like normal society, and all of us kind of finding our way back to some level of normalcy. It was like we always kind of call it like a hangover. It was like the fear hangover, which I think definitely affected a lot of people in so many more ways than I think anyone sort of has ever like realized. And I think it's going to come in time that like we're going to sort of maybe with that ability of hindsight to look back and be like, yes, so like, yeah, so many people died and it was awful, but like also the psychological impact as well. And then all like across the lifespan too, like you've got kids in, school who were out of school for 1 or 2 years and they missed that social adjustment. You had teenagers who missed out on like important parts of like their high school experience, like, and then out like just across the lifespan, and everyone, like, I think it affected people in such fast ways that we still don't know all of the effects of.
Totally. And I think hangover is a perfect term, right? Erin's editing is going to be brilliant here, but if you can tell, I have a little bit of a cough and a little bit of a sore throat. And I led with, I'm not sick. Like, I just got over a cold, right? This like reflexive need to be like, I'm not going to spend anything.
Right? That's so funny.
And, 4 or 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been like a lost inch. Like, it wouldn't have even been a discussion.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to recognize that when our worldview changes, you zoom out in the pandemic, what happened for many people is their worldview changed. We saw infighting within responder communities. We saw responders, and I'm not talking vaccine, I'm not talking political, I'm not anything like that.
No.
I'm saying, like, there are responders that were like, I didn't sign up to provide care during the pandemic. And you had a whole other half going, what the fuck did you sign up for then? Like, this is the most sick people now.
Yeah.
And this just, like, there's this instant disparity. And the idea of such a, bustling, like, suburban or urban place saying, closed, we're all done. Some of the weirdest parts for me outside of the healthcare aspect, like driving on 495 all alone.
Oh my God.
Right? Like, as one of the only people that was allowed to drive, right? And having all these waivers and actually having to get a waiver at certain points, right? And going into a store and being one of 7 people in the store. And that was when it felt almost like apocalyptic in the sense of like, this is where I go because there are hundreds of people there, right? And what do you mean it actually only takes me 20 minutes to get to work when there's no one on the road, right? And how weird and how unusual that can look. The power of that change in worldview, I think we all can benefit from recognizing that in and of itself is a literal measure of a traumatic event. It doesn't have to be gory, it doesn't have to be bloody, it doesn't have to be gross or sad. But the day your worldview changes, you can either say, okay, got it, cool, new thing, right? Much like a child does, right? Yeah. Child doesn't know a ton of stuff, learn some stuff, cool, new thing, great. Or that can do some real damage to you. You can really fight against whether or not that's okay, yearn for what you lost, things like that, all of which are appropriate responses.
Yeah.
But the idea of measuring that against the traumatic ones of why is this bothering me? Well, because you didn't believe you'd live in a world where there was a pandemic. Those are hundreds of years ago. We've advanced medicine from that, this, that, and the other thing. It can all be really overwhelming.
Yeah. And it is, it's about like that perspective too. And I don't know if Bessel says it in the book or I read it somewhere else, but they're like, trauma is in like not the eye of the beholder, but like the eye of the traumatized.
Yeah.
So it's like we also something that you or I like someone, oh my God, like it's fucking life shattering and completely traumatizing, and it is like those kind of gradations of what people do find like affects them, and I think sort of that's kind of, you know, sometimes where like the danger can be, and I think especially in the first responder community too, it's like a newbie comes on and gets affected by like an early job, and then you have that kind of salty parents, no fucking seeing that, and it's like that. Everything is in the eye of like that person who is so deeply affected by it.
Absolutely, and that's such a good like Bastille for like trauma care, right? Is recognizing that someone's lived experience is only that. You talk about even being on the same call. Yeah, I've done calls where it wasn't particularly traumatic to me. I was very busy. I was doing a lot of medicine. I felt as though I really provided the best care that I could, but my partner had to interact with the family.
Yeah.
Right. And I obviously, given my extracurriculars, if you will, often get put in that role because it's my wheelhouse. But you have two people that have experienced a completely different call. And with information that I didn't didn't necessarily need to know in the moment, and how deeply affected one person is versus another just because of how they view things.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. Very much so. I think we went off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's all right.
Join us for episode
That's what
2.
I know. That's what this podcast is all about. Lots of tangents. And there was something that I sort of saw on your website too, and it was about, you said, and I don't know whether it's like an accurate statistic still, but you said that was one first responder completes suicide every 4 days.
Yeah. Yep. One first responder dies by suicide every 4 days in the United States. The extrapolation there is primarily from CDC data.
Okay.
And the question is, what do you consider a first responder? So the dragnet of police, fire, EMS, in some counts, emergency nurses were on that list.
Yeah.
Still, as someone who lives in a crisis state, and I don't necessarily mean mentally, I mean as somebody who's on a crisis team, part of 988, right, that does all this stuff, I can all but set my watch to that. I mean, truly, when I either hear about it, see it, get a phone call from someone, take part in some type of therapeutic care for the survivors of that suicide, it's a real number, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I talked about it on the previous episode that I released when I was in Australia. Like I was home for 6 weeks, and in the space of a week, there was a guy from the police force that I used to work for, took his service firearm and died by suicide in the car park of the station. There was one in Western Australia, and there was our emergency service, so version of 911, like all technical stuff, all in the space of a week, and it's just like, it's so pervasive and it's everywhere. Like it's showing, it's like, you know, and sometimes as someone who wasn't born here and didn't grow up here, and, you know, sometimes from like an outsider's perspective, there are you know, guns that are available that can appear to be like high level of violence in this country. But it also just kind of shows that it's like, it doesn't really seem to matter where you go or what country you're in. Like first responders, it's pervasive and it's tragic, and it's, you know, you could lose count of like how many people like in the realm that like we're all in, just kind of wanting to help and do your piece and educate and all that kind of thing. But it's still so upsetting. And that statistic, like I saw you like say that in like the little video that was on there. Just like, wow, it's every 4 days.
And that doesn't even hold a candle to our military, right? And our service members as a whole.
Yeah.
Who measure their suicidality.
Yeah.
Right. Versus us.
So 22 a day was the statistic for the military. Seriously. So that brings us to a good place, because I want to talk to you about Stay Fit for Duty.
Absolutely.
So,
great. I am the founder of a program called Stay Fit for Duty. Mm-hmm. To zoom all the way out, we do it a number of different ways.
Okay.
Our goals for Stay Fit for Duty are to ensure that you're caring for yourself with the same fire and tenacity that you care for the people you serve. Okay. So our law enforcement officers, our firefighters, our paramedics, our EMTs, our nurses, our healthcare providers will be up to 3 a.m, learning laws, doing procedures, doing techniques, tactics, what have you. But when we say, hey, can you go to bed at 10 o'clock today? No, couldn't possibly. I'm weak. I'm this. I'm that. Right? We don't invest even a tiny fraction of our own self-care to ensuring that we're a better healthcare provider. And I would go as far as to say, especially in American healthcare, we fetishize the human that is broken, beat down, terrible, nasty, but man, they're a bang-up doctor. Man, they're one of the best paramedics you'll ever see. Well, why is that okay? Why do we allow that?
Yeah.
Right? And that's not an individual attack at that person, but why aren't we recognizing that the whole wellness needed to do the job well will make you a better health?
Yeah.
So the flip side of that coin is that person's phenomenal for a while, leaving a trail of, hurt feelings and stuff like that along the way, but then they burn out.
Yeah.
And then they're gone. And you see someone who clearly had the talent and the acumen to be a mainstay of the profession, but didn't emphasize their own care and the care of people around them unless they were a patient on their cat or an individual.
Yeah. And I think it is incredibly easy to sort of get that tunnel vision and just be like focusing on everyone else, but you never really turn that lens around yourself.
Yeah. And I'll be a little more on the nose and say it's easy. It's much easier for me to diagnose from afar. It's much easier for me to tell you what's wrong with other people. It is much, much harder to turn that lens around and be like, what role am I playing in this? What can I help?
And I think as well, like, to turn that lens around, it's scary sometimes, because you go, what am I going to find? What am I going to see? What have I buried so far deep down that it is buried that far because it's so fucking awful and I'm scared to face it, or I'm scared to tackle it, and I'm scared to even try to verbalize it to someone. That's, sometimes you can be bothered by something, but actually being able to put it into words, I think it can be so challenging for people in our profession too, because it's like, no, that's sort of like a help other people. It's not.
Yes.
It's not me.
And you'd asked earlier what I learned early in my career that really revolved around mental health. One of the unintended consequences of that is I learned primarily through watching my colleagues, not necessarily through like formal academy training. We are better than the people that need our help. And we don't necessarily mean that in like a socioeconomic way or a racially driven way or anything like that. But, exactly. But we are better. And to need help is to take that station and that power and reduce it instead of recognizing that at any point this could be.
Yeah.
I, knock on wood, could be the next car accident. I could be the next person who steps off the curb and just dies. How many times have we all seen it in First Responder? Like, there Bob was going to the store and boom, his AVM ruptured and deader than a fart,
Yeah.
And to recognize that that is not a power struggle and I'm not greater than and given the opportunity to help you. It's with pride and respect for the job. It's an honor to help. It's not an obligation. It's not a requirement. It's an honor to do that. I think lowers the barrier that says, I need help too.
Yeah.
I mean, how empathetic have some of our colleagues been to individuals suffering like a suicidal crisis? Because in their mind, I've been exactly where you are, just on a different color linoleum floor.
Yeah.
And I want to help you through this, not I'm better than you, so get up. Because the unintended consequence of that is that's when our partner's here.
Yeah.
Right? I talk about this in substance abuse a lot. Right? If I'm struggling with substance use and I'm working with a colleague, we go to resuscitate somebody who's overdosed. And we're back in the ambulance and like, that piece of shit, scumbag, blah, 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 blah. I have no idea what you're going to have to do. I'm sorry. But to hear that negative dialogue tells me never talk about my own substance use.
Yeah.
And I completely understand we decompress. It's how we make things work. But I always think it's important to be mindful of how we communicate different problems and processes.
Yeah.
Because without a ton of context, all I know is you're not a safe person I can reach out to about this.
Yeah.
And you just further this.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Let me ask, the inception of Stay Fit for Duty, like, did it come, and it might be a multifaceted answer, did it come sort of from you recognizing like your own, I want to say mental health struggles, but just in terms of like being able to go, okay, like this is like a challenging profession, being a first responder is challenging, and I think, you know, we need sort of specific and like individualized help to kind of for our population? Or was it more sort of you looking like externally and being like, I can see as a collective that like my colleagues and you know, seeing them go through things and I want to be that person to help?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it's kind of a marriage of both.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, so many of my brothers and sisters in this profession have also lived this, but I went through a department suicide. I have a good friend of mine and a colleague of mine and a coworker died by suicide. And I watched an agency trying to do everything right. They rolled up the carpet, they put us out of service, they considered that. They mandated that we saw someone who proclaimed to be pretty culturally informed and kind of act with us in sort of an EAP kind of mindset. Those sessions didn't go great. I truly empathize for that mental health professional, maybe a little bit more now than I did previously,
Yeah.
but you know, someone offers the help and then this tragedy happens and an agency's response is to throw 100 clinicians at their front door. So when a 19-year-old sits down and is like, well, it's this and it's school, and my girlfriend doesn't understand why I'm so heartbroken over this woman. She thinks like I was having an affair with this person, you know, and the poor counselor is like, we have like and like we're only here to talk about one thing, right? And that, so first there's the agency like shock, right? Someone in our agency died by suicide. And then you watch individuals try to process that. And then you watch an agency do all of the right things, truly. I was much, much younger back then. I didn't certainly have the access to the agency that I may have now or could have had with some more tenure there. But outwardly, looked like they did a lot of things right.
Yeah.
You have a mental health care experience that isn't fantastic. And you're left in kind of this ether. So you continue on, you do your thing, you keep practicing, and you have little trauma after little trauma after little trauma. And then you make it. And like you mentioned before, top tier clinician, one of the few at an agency that's top tier, and you have another really bad incident, really kind of shakes you back before. You make the decision to first and foremost ask for help and start to get that help and start to realign your own mental health. And the second layer of that decision is you start to share your story. Because now, at that time, I felt as a flight paramedic, especially as a flight paramedic at the agency I was at, it was important for me to take that soapbox, as it were, and be like, right, wrong, or indifferent, we believe this to be like a higher level of paramedicine. I don't necessarily know if I believe that. It's just a different level of paramedicine. Yeah. But can I use that and share my story so 19-year-old James could hear that and say, oh, cool, great, because I'm not great right now. And it's awesome to know that like someone bigger who's done the job, done the thing, is normalizing it for me so that I can go out and obtain those resources. The other half of that is we said we need to, create foundational resources that are available for these people. And although I want to be everyone's therapist, you know, and run like the only practice in the universe, right, which is completely unacceptable, to then align with really culturally informed therapists and start to create a network that says, great, Bob in Texas can go to XYZ and we can start to be that facility.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. And I think saying that, you're like, I want to be like every first responders therapist, I think I have like a similar mentality, just in the fact of like, it just means we're passionate about it. It means that we care. And I don't think it's, a bad thing.
No. I mean, I think my supervisor would point out that it probably leads to some underlying psyche that I still have to work with. But the idea that you want to ensure that your brothers and sisters in the profession as an umbrella, right? When people ask, well, what's a first responder mean to you? I say, if you've been in someone else's house at 3:00 in the morning, then you're a first responder. Or if someone's been wheeled into your place of business at 3:00 in the morning, like you fall into this realm. Yeah. And it's just to be inclusive and to ensure that like you don't have to be a 20-year flight paramedic to be my therapist.
Yeah.
But that might be very helpful.
Yeah.
My own therapist was not a first responder,
mm-hmm.
right? And is still a tremendously informed and very good therapist to me.
Yeah.
So I'm also very cognizant. We don't want the pendulum to swing too far.
Yeah.
Right? You and I are both connected with the Overwatch Collective.
Mm-hmm.
Not every human in the Overwatch Collective is a former Leo, former cop, former military.
Mm-hmm.
Right? These are individuals that have cultural competency to a number of different things and can be really helpful. I think that's really important to encapsulate and not just say, well, if they don't know how to put in an IV, or they've never been to the shooting range, or they've never put handcuffs on somebody, they can't possibly be my therapist.
Yeah.
So to normalize the idea that you need someone trauma informed who is willing to hold space for you in that moment, and can they then work and collaborate with you matters way more than were they a firefighter, were they there to do this.
Yeah. No, and I think that's actually like a really valuable point, because like I think sort of like you're saying, like, with the Overwatch, like sometimes it's because like a parent of theirs was in the first responder realm or military, or for whatever reason they just kind of found themselves, maybe one client who was a first responder who they really connected with, and then that kind of like flows on because then they've got the trust from someone, not just the doors for them.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, I'm wondering what your thought is on it. It's like, I think maybe it's kind of having that, whether it's like you specialize in trauma or having that like trauma-informed sort of thing, maybe would, I don't know if it takes precedence over being that kind of culturally competent as whether you've got experience, because it's like, I think a lot of the time first responders will be coming with normal therapy stuff, like relationship issues and blah, 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 but like where maybe things stem from could be that more trauma focused. So whether that kind of is one of those things that really like underpins a very good relationship that you build in some respects.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I think the relationship matters the most. And I know in my retelling of a not so wonderful therapeutic experience, I gave that person 3 sessions because I had to give that person 3 sessions. However, that is still very much my best. With the exception of like big yucks or big concerns.
Yeah.
You really need to sit with someone for 3 sessions. The intake always sucks. Right? The intake is the physical exam of the mental health space, right? It's like, who are you? What's your sister's name? All this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the place to ask these more specific questions. The second session kind of lets that happen. And then by the third session, right? You're either like, I had a feeling this isn't okay. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce. Or maybe this could work and we can keep moving forward. With the really important caveat that your therapist owes you a safe space to share. And in the therapeutic community, we use the term unconditional positive regard.
Yeah.
Of I'm always in your corner. I always have a job. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you know my life. Right? And the idea that you can come in and tell me you cheated on your wife. We can work together to, I don't want to say correct that, but so that we can work through that. But I'm not going to do that. There's this idea that I'm always going to be a welcoming space for you. Sometimes that is stern. Sometimes that is less stern. Yeah. But what I remind people is if you're at your third session, you're like, this Boomhower guy doesn't do it for me. Sure, whatever, great. you can ask your therapist if they know other therapists.
Yeah.
And I feel like, as culturally uncomfortable as that may be, better to ask.
Yeah.
And your therapist has an ethical kind of obligation. Yeah, thank you. To say, I've been thinking about it too, because 99 times out of 100, when you tell your therapist you're not feeling it, they're like, I get it. And here's a handful of other people.
Yeah.
Right. So you can lean on that network. But to your overarching point, I don't know if you can be culturally informed in the first responder space without having some trauma-informed care behind you. But I do think you can be a good trauma-informed provider without having a ton of cultural competency.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. If Bob, the paramedic, comes in needing profound, marital counseling, and it has nothing to do with work, then do they need that person? No, they probably need a really profound, marriage counselor, couples therapist, what have you, versus the flip side, where I went to a marriage family counselor because EAP told me they were 0.2 miles from my home, and this person didn't have the training, the acumen, or the understanding of the job. And again, to reflect a little bit of ownership on us, I came in with a very full time. Right? I probably should have started to do this research years before.
Yeah.
And instead I come in crisis.
Yeah.
And I set everybody up for failure.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think the unconditional positive regard and the empathy and learning about the humanity style of therapy and in my studying that I'm doing now, and it really kind of just made me go, in regards to the coaching that I do, which is obviously so much on a lower scale than any kind of counseling or therapy or anything like that, but it is just, I think there is just so much power in no matter what context or way that you offer it, is offering that space and that the no judgment, no shame, just making so that someone feels safe to offer on you and share their truth. If it's fucking awful, like you're saying, if it's an awful job they've attended that they can't shake, or they've cheated on their partner, or they've done just something that they're ashamed of, being able to hold that space and have them not feel like they're being judged, and just being able to open that space. I think it's such a privileged position to be able to offer that to someone. It really resonates with me.
Sorry.
And so, how long has Stay Fit for Duty been around for now?
Stay Fit for Duty started in 2018. Yep, so we've been around for a bit. So to the point of our work being ensuring that providers care for themselves as hard as they care for the people that they take an oath to serve, we do that in a number of ways.
Yep.
I am a critical incident stress management instructor. So we have a handful of different critical incident stress models. I don't think today's the day to hash out which one's which. I chose one. I'm an instructor for that. And that's the takeaway there, because I feel that peer support and critical incident stress can get us really far.
Yeah.
What we are changing in that realm is the idea of solely reactive care to proactive.
Yes.
And how that kind of falling into the knowledge and education and practice and the check-ins when things are fine. Right? Instead of allowing a CISM team, a critical incident stress management team, to be seen as the folks in polo shirts that swarm on you when there's a bad event, right?
Yeah.
And changing that model and changing that focus.
Yeah.
So we have the peer and the critical incident side of the coin. We have the advocacy of let me go to a department and speak for a couple hours on my experience, on my story. And some of my colleagues share their stories as well, so we can continue to widen that net. And then the component of not only my counseling services, but the counseling services of the culturally competent folks that we've aligned with.
Yeah.
And really, to put a bow on it, the last thing that we do is we help in any way that we can. And I don't mean that to sound like, we're the Walmart of any type of care, but, I've had agencies reach out to me and say, I need your help building a peer support team from soup to nuts. We are starting at the very beginning, and we're, putting you on contract for a year and doing all this stuff. I've had another place say, I just want you to look over our guidelines. And does that sound reasonable to you, right? And this ability to be flexible and similar to the therapeutic space, be able to provide what that individual needs and not say, I have 3 plans, right? I have the Supreme, the Golden, and the Silver, right? And you have to pick one of those, but really trying to collaborate with people and just be available and be communicative in that space and try to identify what is helpful.
Yeah, no, and I think, having like a jack of all trades, but as in being able to offer all of those like different components is like so worthwhile, because like you're saying, like I don't know of many other people who can, tick all those boxes in the way that you do, and the passion that you really have for it. So moving forward. And yeah, I was on the website the other day, and then you've got like the 988 sort of contact details, and there was something like a list of providers that are sort of able to, if they were culturally competent, or they offer services to first responders.
Yes. Yep. So we essentially have a very, very rudimentary listing of individuals that have asked to be focused on our site, or groups or advocacy groups that we align with, that we share a mission with, that we just want to help. Again, like you said, like that one therapist that works well with the responder that kind of spreads that. We would it would mean a lot to us if someone said, well, stay fit for duty, trust them.
Yeah.
Then they're good for us, right? And we are a bit selective on that front because of that, right? And recognizing that all we want to do is ensure that the resources that we provide, if it's a service that we can't provide, or we're far away, or we're not able to do it, then we want to ensure that the people that we're reporting to have met our metrics. Right? That they do the same thing, they work just as hard.
Like the bona fides that,
exactly.
you're not going to be steering them in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
And I think, like we were saying, both sort of somewhat affiliated with the Overwatch Collective, that, I think it's like that similar mission of like, just want to help as many people as you can in the way that you can, in the best way possible.
And there is a program that vets the individuals, right? You can't just send them an email and get on. You have to say, this is what I do, this is why I get on. And some of the individuals that we collaborate with, Robin being one, Rick being another, that will talk to these people and reach out and try to ascertain it. I think that that's really important, right? It's one thing to like send a bolo out and get a database of everybody that says they've worked with Paramedic before. It's a completely different thing to say, well, tell me about that.
Yeah.
Well, how long have you done that? Oh, you were a police officer for 20 years. Okay, cool. That's different, right? Versus like, oh, you run Cincinnati PD's wellness program? Oh, cool. Come on over, right? And just that layer of trust in these people are also working to do it. There's no way you can make a resource list. That's 1,000% every time.
Yeah.
But I also want to run the type of business where someone can call me and say, I went to Bob. I didn't have a great experience. And me take that personally, not offense-wise, but in the sense of, I'm on the phone with Bob being like, hey, we're actually all set.
Yeah.
We're gonna take that for our set, because we really want to ensure that we have the right people, not the number of people. Like, no one pays me to be on my website, right? I don't sponsor anyone or anything like that. So if you see it on my website, it is a program that I've either directly communicated with or have heard from people I trust that it's a platform that works.
Yeah, and I think that's super important too. Like, because obviously, you're not wanting to put anything out there that's going to put on.
Exactly.
And so is it just you like doing this? Do you have, seriously?
Yeah, it's seriously just me.
Because you're not busy enough.
Not at all. No. I do have a handful of coworkers that help in different components. A good friend of mine helps with the payroll stuff. So we collaborate with a first responder focus group out of New York State, and a colleague of mine helps make sure that that all happens.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's and we are looking to grow, and we're looking to make this a slightly bigger thing. I think our biggest fear is becoming an organization where, I thought I was getting James. Oh, no, well, you're getting Susie, right? And making sure that we're keeping it true. But I do have a number of people that ask to help, and as we are looking at what help would look like and what would that be, we'll grow and we'll expand as we do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And so you're saying you have apparel, so to me you sell merch.
I do. Thank you.
So if anyone is sort of looking to purchase or is looking for resources or anything they're interested in checking your website out, it's stayfit4, like the number 4,
yep.
duty.org.
Correct.
Right?
Yep. And that's where you can get everything. Instagram is my social media of choice. It's the one I'm on the most.
Yep.
A lot of the material that I post will cross-post into X and into Facebook.
Yep.
But truly, if you're trying to get a hold of me, Instagram's the way to do it. My caveat that my Instagram DMs and my email are not surrogates for crisis lines.
Yep.
Either is like the office phone number, like none of that is a surrogate for a crisis line. But I've been incredibly fortunate where individuals have reached out and said, hey, a friend of mine told me to reach out to you and you have time and can we do this stuff with the other caveat that unless we very deliberately make it clear, I'm not acting as your therapist.
Yeah.
Unless a lot of paperwork is exchanged hands, right? And you have no doubt that you're seeing me as a client.
Yeah.
I'm coming to you as a peer and as a crisis worker and collaborating with you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And is there like the capability, or do you accept sort of, like donations in terms of helping keep it like ticking along?
Yeah, we are working to become a nonprofit. Right now, we are not yet a nonprofit. The irony of how expensive it is to become a nonprofit.
Oh, really?
However, we're working to go down that space, and we are always willing to receive whatever anyone's willing to give us. But again, in the spirit of full transparency, we're not yet a 501c3, so I can't formally accept the donation. That isn't taxed by everybody. Okay. So please reach out if you'd like to help, and I'm sure there's some ways we can collaborate, or courses that we teach where people have offered to buy the food, right? Like, oh, if you're going to go teach this thing, like the food will be sponsored by us. And there are plenty of ways to be involved and make it full. But just full transparency, not yet a 501c3.
Fair enough. And do you have any presentations or seminars or anything sort of coming up that you might want anyone to know about?
I do, yeah. That'd be awesome. I have the medical transport conference circuit is starting now. Yeah. So I'll be speaking at a number of different events here. Next week, I'll be speaking at the Critical Care Transport Medical Conference, which is amazing. I speak at the Flight Bridge Ed conference later in the spring, and then early September, I speak with the Every Coast helicopter operators. And kind of in between there'll be some classes that we're putting on along with some tools for our therapist colleagues. I'll be putting on a couple different webinars on cultural competence, kind of wearing both my hats. As a paramedic who's becoming a therapist, here's what is really beneficial to be culturally informed. We've hosted a few of those before, and they've been incredibly well attended. So we're really trying to align with the program site that I use to offer that space.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Well, if there's anything further that anyone wants to know, please check out Stay Fit for Duty. You can find James on Instagram. And if you're comfortable, I'll put like your Instagram handle and the website in the show notes. And any email that's like appropriate to be able to get you on. I think that's all my thing. We typically finish these podcasts off with asking a couple of questions.
Yeah.
And so it's about the name of the podcast is I Will Hold Space for Darkness, and that's kind of stems from sort of, I guess, my thought at that darkness permeates a lot of first responder roles in regards to what we see and what we do, and the fact that we see death on a regular basis and all that kind of thing. There's just like an element of darkness, and I think the whole purpose of what I do here is just to share our stories and like just like someone today to share with us, and tools and coping mechanisms and experiences, and just so if one person listens and it resonates with them, it's going to help. So the first question I normally ask is, what do you do to hold space for your darkness?
I allow it. I waste less and less time as I get older, shaming it, running from it. I really work to acknowledge it and to allow it to be with me for a period of time. And it helps a lot. It really does help a lot to just allow it to be, allow myself to feel and work through it.
Yeah, No, that makes a lot of sense. I think I probably do something similar, like if I'm having down days like that, like you got the day. Like I give myself the day. It's like you're in a shit mood, you're whatever's going on with you, you've got that day. Tomorrow it's done with, but today you can have today. Nice. So yeah, it definitely resonates. The second question is, what can someone do, whether it's a friend, a colleague, a loved one, anything like that, like in order to support you or help you with that?
Well, for me personally, or like as general advice for me?
Deal of choice. You can give that.
So well, since you gave me more questions to ask, yeah. So for me, it's checking in. That is really helpful. I consider myself to be an intelligent human. I work really hard at this stuff, and there are days where I'm really down. Anybody, I have no friends, I have no one to communicate with. And meanwhile, I'm ignoring text messages as they're coming in, right? Like, well, we can be a little disordered when we're really stressed out.
Yeah.
So that is actually my advice for both, is just do not be afraid to check and reach out and send support. One of the most thoughtful shows of support I've received was an illness that kind of fell on top of a handful of really bad calls. Did what we talked about, right? I went to work sick as a dog, right? This was back when that was completely socially acceptable, and had a handful of really bad calls.
Yeah. And
couldn't stop thinking that if I was 100%, that these calls would come to. That's not true, right? But in that moment, right? Why not double down on the self-blame and all of these things? And a good friend of mine emailed me a DoorDash and was like, "Why don't you just not worry about food? You know, food in the kitchen, nothing. Just eat some food on a paper plate, throw it all in the trash." And it was so small, but so tremendously common. And the last half of that answer is it doesn't have to be. I have given people fruit snacks and a bottle of water, and you would think that I gave them $1. So don't be afraid of offering a small gesture, because that can really be impactful and a much bigger impact.
Yeah, and even just like in the smallest regard, like a text message, not expecting a reply, because like you're saying, sometimes when you're in that space and you can feel overwhelmed, just like, I feel like I'm really bad, but then I have like 10 people to respond to, and it's almost like it's too much. So it's just like, hey, something just as simple as that. All right. I think we're done, James.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time and your expertise. And I really love, everything that you're doing, like Stay Fit for Duty and your clinical studies, because it's very like empowering for someone like me who's really just at like the beginning of my psychological studies. So to see you doing it and see it in action and that kind of thing, it's definitely very motivating.
Yeah, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, I promise, and it's not a train.
It's a long fucking tunnel. It's going to take a while. But and your critical care work.
Oh, thank you.
Great. All right, so this has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And we're going to wrap it up. As always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers. Hi guys, it's Erin Jane here. Firstly, thank you for listening to I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. This podcast really is for you, the listener. And I hope you're finding as much value in listening to these conversations as I am in having them. If you'd like to offer any feedback, suggest a subject matter, are interested in being a podcast guest, or would like to get in contact to receive First Responder life and wellness coaching services, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Erin Jane Coaching or my website, www.erinjanecoaching.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of this darkness community. Cheers.